Hello and welcome back to Economics with Professor Klein at Cuesta College. So we're going to continue our discussion of elasticity today, and we're going to discuss income elasticity. And so one of the things about income elasticity and cross-price elasticity that is different from price elasticity of demand and price elasticity of supply is that in this case, with both income and cross-price, if it's positive or negative, that's going to tell us something about these items. So income elasticity, I have the definition up here. It's the responsiveness of quantity demanded, how much we're going to buy, to a change in income. All right. And so what we're going to find is that if it is negative, if the income elasticity is negative, meaning less than zero, that's going to tell us that it is an inferior good, right? And so to interpret this, why would it be an inferior good? It's saying that these are moving in opposite directions. So it's saying that if our income is going up, we're buying less, and vice versa, that if our income is falling, that we are buying more. So things that we like to think about that are inferior goods, things like bus rides, right? Top ramen, particularly for college kids, right? Because you tend to buy these when your income is lower, right? And as your income increases, you're going to buy less of these items. And again, this is ceteris paribus. Economists tell stories about median behavior. So if it's negative, it's an inferior good. And if it's positive, right, then it's going to be what we call a normal good. But now that we're going to be able to calculate, we're going to get a little bit more specific if it's positive. All right. So normal goods, those where as our income goes up, so does the quantity we want to buy. Now, there's a continuum, right? And so here I'm going to add some information. If it's less than 1, but greater than 0, right? So it's normal, but it's less than 1, then we tend to think of those as necessities, right? So we do buy more of them as our income goes up, but not in proportion to our income. So these might be things like electricity, right? When your income goes up, you might spend more on electricity as you buy more TVs or you buy more personal devices for your home, but it's not going to be necessarily in proportion to how much your income has gone up because you're likely already using a certain amount of electricity, right? Salt is also a necessity, right? If your income doubles, you're probably not going to double the amount of salt that you buy. So that's if it's between 0 and 1. Again, these are all positive, meaning that they're normal good. We like to think of if it's just a bit greater than 1, then we're just going to call that a normal good. And if it is much greater than 1, so notice we are not being specific here. So what I put here is just simply 2 greater than signs or less than signs. Oops. And I just noticed. That one should be greater. There we go. There we go. Less than 1, greater than 1, and much greater than 1, that's where we consider them to be luxury goods, right? Where as our income goes up, we buy much more of these items, right? So this might be airline tickets, right? As your income increases, you might go more often than just once a year or more often than once a decade or whatever you're currently doing, right? So we don't necessarily have a definite number here to when we consider things luxury goods. To make things simple in this class, if you're concerned about taking an exam, we'll just say if it's greater than 2, we're going to call it a luxury good, right? So if it's between 1 and 2, we'll just call it a normal good. And if it's greater than 2, we're going to call it a luxury good. Now, obviously, this is where the social and science aspect of this class comes in. I would, in the real world, if I was looking at something, the actual good itself would weigh whether or not I called it a normal good or a luxury good, right? Okay, so if it's negative, it's inferior. If it's positive, it's normal. And then if it's less than 1, it's a necessity. And the larger the number gets, the closer it is to a luxury good. All right, so let's do an actual calculation. We're going to use the the midpoint method, right? So we talked about in the first video that you could use it doing percentages, and you can still use percentages. And as I mentioned, we always want denominations in the denominator, right? So if we were using percentages, we would do the percentage change in quantity demanded over the percentage change in income. As we update this to the midpoint method, right? So when do we use the midpoint method? When do we use the percent method? Well, if we're given percents, we use the percent method. If we're given something along the lines of, when people have $20,000 in income, they buy 60 units. So maybe this is 60 kilowatt hours of electricity. And when their income increases to $30,000 a year, right, they increase their kilowatt usage maybe per month to 80, right? So that's where I don't have all of the definitions because I'm not quite clear what I'm talking about, but maybe it's electricity. So first notice something, right? If we're given the information that as our income goes up, so does the amount we want, we can already define this as a normal good, right? And so that's why if it's negative, it's inferior, because we're saying that as our income goes up, we're actually buying less. So that's where the piece of information is coming in. So plug this in. Now, it doesn't matter the order so long as you keep the information together. So I can start with 80 and subtract 60, or I can take 60 and subtract 80. What I mean by keeping the information together, if I start with 80 in the numerator, I should start with 30,000 in the denominator. All right? Okay. So I'm going to start with 80 minus 60. So initial minus our original, and again, it doesn't matter. The other thing that I often can be helpful is to simply put the two pieces of information together. So we take the difference, and the reason why this is called the midpoint method, we're going to divide by the midpoint. Now, what's halfway, what's midway between 80 and 60? Right? Sometimes thinking about numbers can be a little bit easier than plugging them into equations. All right? So that's going to be my numerator. I'll simplify that in just a moment. And then to follow, I'm going to have 30,000 minus 20,000. And then I'm going to divide that the halfway between 30,000 and 20,000. Right? So I'm going to use, and you can plug this directly into a calculator. What you have to be careful is that you're following the order of operations. So this is where I would actually encourage you not to plug it into your calculator immediately, right? Let's use our numbers. You have the ability to do this. So 80 minus 60, you can do that. That's 20. Halfway between 60 and 80, right? So that's 100. If you add those together, that's 140. Halfway is 70. All right, so I'm going to leave this equation for just a moment. We'll come back and simplify it. So I have 20 over 70 in the numerator. All right, the difference between 30,000 and 20,000, that's 10,000. Halfway between 20,000 and 30,000 is 25,000. All right, so this does not look like it's an easy simplification yet, but we're not finished, right? So I can simplify the numerator to 2 over 7, right? Just drop a 0. Now, I can also drop the 10,000. And now I have 10 over 25. They're both divisible by 5. How many times does 5 go into 10? That's 2. How many times does 5 go into 25? That's 5. Now, so many people think that they don't like fractions. But in order to get rid of this fraction, you just divide by the reciprocal. So that cancels that out, and now you have it over 1. So we have to do the same thing to the top, multiply it by 5 over 2. Notice what we have now. We cancel out the 2. The answer to our problem is 5/7, right? Now, If you have to enter a number, then yes, go ahead and plug this into your calculator to figure out 5/7. But here is what we've figured out without having to plug anything into a calculator. It's a positive number, so it is a normal good. And then it's less than 1, so it is a necessity, right? So this is how we do income elasticity using the midpoint method, right? Okay, so I hope that helped. Again, if we had this in percents, we could just plug them in directly. And again, we're going to see that different things will have an impact. The more expensive things are, we will see that the more likely they are to change their elasticity. All right, I hope that was helpful. Come back for cross price elasticity. See you soon.